I'm Rabbi Josh Weinberg, the Vice President of Israel and Reform Zionism for the URJ. I'm sitting with
Orly Erez-Likhovski, the Executive Director of the Israel Religious Action Center. So good to be here with you.
Really wonderful to be with you. And Orly, we are sitting in Washington, D.C. now at the tail end of the Religious Action Center's Consultation on Conscience. This was a conference that we used to run every 2 years that would really interact with our lawmakers in Washington, D.C. and would include time to go lobby on Capitol Hill. And we have not had this conference in 6 years, since before COVID. And this is your first time as an Israeli, as the director of the Israel Religious Action Center, the arm of justice and advocacy and social justice of the Israeli Reform Movement. Why was it important for you to come and be here with us today, or this weekend, this time? Yeah.
You know, I think would have been always important for me, but especially at this time when we're struggling, leading so many struggles against autocratic regimes in a very, very challenging time. And it's been going on for a few years. And I think at this time, it's really important, first of all, just to be together with like-minded people and just gain strength from the feeling that we have the power, they have the capacity, and we have so many devoted people who want to live in a better future, both in the States and in Israel, but also to learn from each other. I think because we are struggling so hard and we are up against people who are very committed to work against all of our values, it is super important to stop for a minute and think, what are the strategies we can use? What could work? What is, maybe something works here and does not work in Israel, maybe the other way around, but sort of to learn from each other's experience. And I think we in Israel are sort of 2 years ahead of you. We have been fighting this government for 3 years now. And we can share, what we have been going through.
Yeah. So first of all, in the sort of pre-October 7th world, when the current coalition set out its agenda for what they call judicial reform, and we sort of call an upheaval or a coup. A judicial coup, absolutely. You've been here a few times since October 7th. What was the feeling of solidarity or identification with, in terms of when you visited, North American Reform Movement communities and conferences?
Well, yeah, actually, I want to go before October 7th.
Okay, let's go back.
Talk for a minute about the pro-democracy protest, because I think, first of all, in Israel, we experienced a very challenging but also exhilarating period where we felt sort of the awakening of the Israeli liberal public. And I remember when I came...
So the political activity of people...
Suddenly people who were not politically active went to the streets week after week to stand up for our values. And this is, for us who have been doing this for so many years, it was really amazing to be joined by hundreds of thousands of Israelis week after week for 9 months. And I remember when I came to the States, people were like, wow, how do you do it? How is it possible? Because it was really something...
You keep that kind of momentum going week after week after week, right?
Right. So I think in this sense, we were
really... Did you think it was going to happen, by the way? Did you think people would keep coming back every Saturday night? I mean, it was like, it ended only because of October 7th.
Right. I was
40 weeks in a row.
I was very concerned. But I felt during this time that we were really a light unto nations, right? Because we were a real example on a global scale of people rising and actually walking week after week just to make our life a better
I remember one Saturday night protest that I happened to be in Israel, and I was walking with one of our Reform Movement colleagues and lay leaders from Hungary, from Budapest, and we're walking down Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv, during the protests, and he had tears in his eyes. And I said to him, are you okay? He goes, why can't we learn from this in Budapest? We're also, coming on terrible threats to our democracy and to civil rights, essentially. And this is, and you're doing it here. And he was so moved by that.
And so it was indeed a really important period. By the way, we joined the Reform Movement, joined the protest, and under the banner...
officially, right?
Officially from the very first day. And we said, we protect democracy in the name of Judaism, okay? Because we brought a Jewish voice that goes against the legal coup. I think if we would not have an October 7th, I think we would have been able to stop this completely. Obviously, October 7th happened, and we thought, maybe naively, that the government would understand what kind of damage they did to really split Israeli society with their run to give themselves unrestricted power.
Do you think Do you think that our enemies like Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran saw the fracturing of Israeli society and said this is the time to attack?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, the government uses it to say that the protesters are to blame for October 7th,
Right.
which is, of course, complete rubbish. But I do think they saw it. And it was, a difficult time for Israel. Obviously, in retrospect, later it was much, much more difficult after October 7th. But I think that obviously after October 7th, we thought it's going to stop. It didn't stop at all. And the government, for a while sort of froze it, the legal coup, and then came back and really is pushing for it putting a lot of energy into actually pushing it during the last few months. But to your question, I think that right after October 7th, there was a really growing sense of peoplehood. I think that in times of catastrophe, we really come together.
Solidarity and
I think for both sides, I think a lot of North American Jews felt much closer to Israel, and a lot of Israelis felt closer to North American Jews. And I think a lot of Israelis understood, or for the first time were aware of the increase in anti-Semitic attacks.
Sure. Yes, I remember sitting in Israel in Tel Aviv and a waitress asking us, "Oh my God, you came from New York? Like, I'm so worried for you. I'm so concerned about what's it like being Jewish there in New York." And I said, "Okay, it's not as terrible as you think, but
so in this
sure,
sense, I think it brought us together. Obviously, after a while, it's the rift, I think, grew much larger as the war in Gaza continued, and there have been, of course, a lot of debates within Israel whether we should continue with the war and outside of Israel. But going back to consultation on conscience, I think we are now at a very, very critical time for both our democracies.
Yeah.
I think in Israel we are in a very sensitive point where we have very dangerous measures promoted by the government. On the other hand, we have an Israeli public that is exhausted after 3 years of this government and 2 years of war. Drained,
emotionally, physically traumatized,
obviously by October 7th and the following war. And it's very dangerous because, of course, we need to protest vigorously and to tell the government, as we did in 2023, you can't go on with stripping away the powers from all of our gatekeepers, the Attorney General and the Supreme Court, and we need to be very, very strong in protecting our democracy with an eye to the upcoming elections. And I think this is something that was also very evident in consultation, your midterms next year, and our elections.
So give some examples of things that you saw here and some of the issues that we're discussing, and even some of the people that we met. We had some different elected officials here and different thought leaders. And what left an impression on you from this experience?
I think in general, just hearing so many people saying we are not willing to give up, we must stand up for our values, even if it's hard, even if we're afraid, even if it seems we are going to lose hope. I think also sort of building on previous struggles, obviously like the civil rights struggles of the 1960s, and looking at the strategies that they have used and what worked and what we can learn from there to, present day, what can work. Thinking of really novel strategies that can make a difference and can cause our governments to stop or to understand that they're up against something very big, people that are not going to give up. So I think in general, sort of drawing inspiration from really amazing people and leaders within our movement and outside our movement, and also thinking about the different strategies. I kept thinking during the whole weekend, what could work in Israel and what couldn't, because the systems are very different. I mean, we have a lot of similarities,
issues,
a lot
but
of differences.
Play out in different contexts. Anything come to mind of something that could work in Israel, or that you'd say, "Oh, I'm taking that back, and I want to discuss it more with our people there"?
There's been a lot of talk about how there are people within the government system that we can work with. A lot of people who are on the good side.
Sure.
But it's hard for them to stay within the system with whether they're feeling they can still make a difference or they cannot make a difference. And that sort of caused me to think about a lot of things we are having, the same dilemmas we're having in Israel, as to how we should still have good people within those systems, and it's becoming harder and harder. whether it's within, government ministries or the police, or the army, or, I mean, it's really all across the board. And I think we have similar dilemmas. I'm not sure it's like completely the same situation, but that sort of got me going. Other questions are questions regarding boycott and having strikes in Israel. We had a few.
I'll say from the other hand, what's been fascinating for me here is actually the place of Israel at the consultation on conscience. I'll just share one story is that in 2014, rabbis organizing rabbis and Jonah Pesner and the IRAC organized in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act from 1964. We marched from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
With over 140 rabbis, each taking different turns. It's a pretty long walk. And we were carrying a Sefer Torah with us. We were carrying a Torah scroll with us and with partners from the NAACP. Okay. So I was new. I had only been in New York just a few months after having moved from Israel. And I said, okay, I'll come. I'll do a day. And so I'm walking in the middle of rural Georgia with 7 of my Reform rabbinic colleagues and a whole slew of the crew from the NAACP.
Mm-hmm.
And when they found out that I worked on Israel stuff, they were super interested. They had so many questions about the Palestinians and the peace process and what's going to happen. But one of my Reform rabbinic colleagues turned to me and asked, and he said, Tozer, are you taking a day off to be here, like from your job? I said, I don't know. I've never even come close to taking all of our allotted, days off. He's like, no, but did you take specifically PTO, paid time off, to come here for the day? And I couldn't understand why.
Well, you would that.
Right. What are you talking about? What's the question behind it? I said, what are you getting at? Like, why is that important to you? He goes, well, because you're the Israel and the Zionist guy. And this,
what do you have to do with social justice?
and then, well, exactly. What do you have to do? Malachav is essentially in Hebrew. He says, what does this have to do with social? Here we are doing social justice stuff.
Yeah.
I said, oh, okay, I get what you're asking, and I'm thinking to myself. And the first thing that came to me was that I said, Black Lives Matter in Israel too, and we spend a lot of our time combating racism in Israel. And I said, so the issues are the same. So why shouldn't I be here? And I said, the second thing I said is like, well, wait a second. If I don't come and show up here, how can I expect anyone to come and show up for me as well? And if you remember, there was the start, the Black Lives Matter movement. We were starting to already see signs that said, from Ferguson, Missouri to Palestine, and trying to link those two things, which I'm not going to get into that right now, but I started to see that. I said, well, no, wait a second. We also have to stand up for that. And because our Zionism is a social justice-based Zionism, the tradition of Dick Hirsch, who founded the IRAC and then, moved to Jerusalem, and then eventually IRAC and the IPJ, exactly. So it was fascinating. So this consultation was the first time in all of the history where there was a deliberate, intentional, what's the word I'm looking for? Approach, or like very intentionally put in lots of Israel programming. So you and I spoke on a plenary. We each did 2 workshops, and there was a lunchtime thing, and everyone else spoke about it. Orly, I know that it was super meaningful for everyone here to have you here and you be here. And my hope is that next time we bring an even bigger delegation from IRAC, from the INPJ, from our Israeli colleagues who, we really want to learn from each other's experience here. We're both approaching these major threats to democracy, to basic human rights, civil rights, all of these things. And we really are stronger together when we go for it.